some names on the list who haven't shown up yet, so we might have some more joining us. I might get a little cozier over the next hour. But I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Peter Bring. A lot of you know me, some of you don't. I head up the Houston chapter of a group called Citizens Climate Lobby. Some of you saw our table in the back there. I also participate in the Citizens Climate Lobby Conservative Caucus, which is part of the kind of a subset. So CCL is a nonpartisan organization. We're working with Congress for a market-based solution to the climate and energy challenge that we have. And the Conservative Caucus is kind of a group of volunteers who are focused on doing events like this, outreaching to our friends on the right side of the political spectrum. So having an event like this is really exciting, and partnering with the groups that we're working with here today is also really exciting for us. So some of the groups that are co-hosting with us tonight, the Log Cabin Republicans of Houston, we're happy to have them as a partner. The Houston Young Republicans, the UH College Republicans, and University of St. Thomas College Republicans, and Houston Renewable Energy Group. So you all might have heard of the event through one of those respective organizations. So thank you to them for getting the word out. As you saw, we have food and refreshments in the back. Help yourself to that, and we have the room till about 8:30, so we'll have a little reception afterward. I also wanted to recognize we have a few special guests with us tonight. Some might not be here, but I'm going to go through the list, and y'all can let me know if you are or not here. Well, if you're not here, let me know. So actually, it's interesting. We have a few. The Texas 7 seat is a pretty popular seat, as it turns out. So from Congressman Culberson's office, Brooke Blasitas, she's going to join. Is she? Okay, Brooke is not here yet. Maybe she'll show. Gentleman who is vying for that seat, Mr. James Lloyd, was in the Republican primary. I know James. I saw here. James is in the back there. Hey, James. Thanks for being here. We also have the Democratic candidate running for that seat with us tonight. Another James Cargus. James, say hi to everybody. Great to have you here. Republican Brian Chu, who is running for a state Senate district, or state rep district. Okay, they haven't made it yet, maybe. I want to recognize former Republican candidate, former candidate for mayor, Bill White, joined us for a little bit. He had to leave early, but he stopped by and shared a few words with the congressman. Appreciate that. In addition, we have a lot of leadership here in Texas for a lot of the Republican groups. We have with us John Bauckham, who is the chair of the Texas Young Republican Federation. So, John, say hi. I didn't see Chris. I don't think Chris is here. Is there anybody else I missed from leadership in one of the Republican groups in town? In the back?
Brooke Blasitas from Congressman Culberson.
Oh, there's Brooke. Hey, Brooke. Howdy. You can come on up. We got seats up in the front for you. Is Deacon Dunning here? No? Okay. Deacon Dunning from the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston, may be joining us. Tracy Hester. Did Tracy make it out? Didn't see Tracy. Okay. Well, we had a few folks. Maybe they'll show up. The final thing I just want to make a note of is the rest of you here. I was really impressed seeing a lot of the folks who were signing up for this event. We've got a lot of current and former oil and gas folks. I saw ExxonMobil, Shell, NG, Conoco, BP, Hess. From the power industry, Dynegy and Clean Line Energy. Other industry folks from IHS, Macquarie, Waste Management are here. And of course from academia, Rice, and University of St. Thomas. Those are my opening remarks. I'm going to invite the president of the Log Cabin Republicans of Houston, Marco Roberts, and he's going to introduce Congressman Inglis. So, Marco.
Thanks. Actually, I wasn't really planning on making any opening remarks until just about half an hour before this thing was supposed to begin. But last night I had a chance to meet Congressman Bob Inglis for the first time and to really explore some of the ideas that he's presenting. And I myself, coming from as a conservative Republican, rather somewhat skeptical, posed some hard questions to Mr. Inglis, which he gave me some very interesting answers. And so as I was thinking about this, I thought, I would like to offer a personal welcome to the congressman. I asked him if that would be okay, and he said, go ahead. So I'd like to say this, and I write these down because, I might forget something. So what I wanted to say is, and those of you who attended our Log Cabin Republican dinner have heard me say this is one of the things that we're thinking about these days. But I often make the argument that we Republicans, for far too long, have allowed the far left to define the issues in many areas of public interest and to set the terms of the debate on those issues, leaving us to simply split ourselves between those that support the left's positions and those that oppose them. And yet I believe that it is often the case that if we refrain for a moment from simply reacting to what the left presents us and take a broader look at the questions placed before us, we will find that we have been given false choices, false dichotomies from which to choose and by which we needlessly divide ourselves. But I think a new wave of Republicans is coming, a new conservative-minded vanguard that refuses to fall into this ideological trap of the far left. And that Bob Inglis may very well be among the leaders of this new wave. And so on behalf of Log Cabin Republicans of Houston and all the other groups that are hosting this event, I would like to extend a welcome to Congressman Bob Inglis, to our great metropolis, and to let him know that we look forward to his discussion on the important questions of climate change, the impact of human activity on our climate, and what are the appropriate answers and potential solutions to those questions which are at great issue today. So welcome, sir. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Marco, and thank all of you for coming. Wow, what a great number of people here. Thank you. So I got some audience participation right at the start. I got to know how many folks are CCL associated with CCL. Okay, great. And how many was those other Republican groups? Great. Okay, now you're getting used to raising your hands. All right, everybody's comfortable with this. Now, who here longs for the days of Ronald Reagan's presidency besides me? Okay, now keep those hands up. If you're Reagan, and you think climate change is real, and I'm going to give you another one, which is its human cost. Okay, so you like Ronald Reagan, and you think it's that the climate change is real, and you think it's human cost. Okay, I'm going to go kiss each one of these people. The most important people on the planet, without a doubt. Everybody else that's progressive, well, forget you. You go listen to Al Gore if you want to. But those people who had their hands up are the most important people on the planet. Because you know what? The left, to quote a line out of Oklahoma, has gone about as far as they can go. And so it is up to the right to supply the solution that matches the sentiment on the left to do something about climate. So those few people literally are among the most important people on the planet. So Peter, get them all signed up for me, would you?
Got free swag here tonight.
By the way, there will be a collection plate later for those that were raising their hands. Expect checks from those people. No checks needed. But so here's what I'm here to do. I'm here to support the wonderful work of CCL, and particularly the Conservative Caucus that Peter is working with, because CCL is self-aware that much of its membership is left of center. They want to grow a right wing, because if you have a condor wing on the left and a hummingbird wing on the right, that bird is not going to fly very straight, and you're going to end up with some troubles. And so we at republicEn.org want to help CCL and everybody on the eco-right, as we call it, develop a matching condor wing on the right to the left wing of the environmental left. Because then what we can do is we can get this bird flapping just right, and we can make this thing happen. And so the language I'm about to use is tribal language of my tribe. And it is rather high-octane conservatism, all right? And so it could be offensive to some, but on the other hand, if you're not among those who are raising their hands at that very important question I was asking there about Reagan and all that, maybe it'll equip you to talk to your Uncle Charlie, who, let's see, you will see perhaps at Thanksgiving. Charlie's going to come for Thanksgiving. He's going to be like my brother Wiley. He thinks it's all a great plot, not necessarily about Chinese, but by somebody else maybe. And so for you, this is an opportunity to equip you to talk to Uncle Charlie. For those that are conservative in the room, I hope it's an opportunity for you to hear whether this really makes sense, if you're a conservative, to do something about climate change. And so what we do at republicEn.org is we send out messengers with a particular MO and a particular message. So I'll describe for you the messengers, the MO, and the message, and then we'll open up for your questions and comments. So I'm one of the messengers. I get 3 people in D.C., 1 in Wisconsin, because I know that Paul Ryan knows that what I'm about to describe as this message is exactly the right policy. We have 1 person in Illinois, so that we can pick up the low-hanging fruit of moderates in Chicago. I play a moderate when I'm in Chicago. I'm not very good at it, but I play a moderate when I'm there. And then we got a guy in Florida, because Florida has a real felt need. If you've heard the news, Zika is now in Miami. And if Zika, because of warming, continues to move up and say it gets to the Magic Kingdom, just how many people are going to want to go to the Magic Kingdom with, say, Zika and dengue there in Orlando? And so we're talking not far off consequences, we're talking right now consequences, and that's why we find receptivity in Florida especially to the message that you'll hear in a moment. And so, and then there are 2 of us that live and work from South Carolina. So 8 total folks in this little organization called republicEn.org. And then on the website, you'll see on that card, which we want you to stand with us by going to that website. You can do it actually right now in the course of this if you want to, on your cell phone, take a selfie and load it up, because we want to show your smiling face on our site. You'll find over 1,000 people who have decided to stand with us. Now, for all the CCL folks, that is a paltry number. CCL has thousands and thousands of people, and we're very grateful for all those folks. We actually think that all it takes is 200 active republicEns, we call them, in 25 House districts, which is 5,000 people. And we'll get a change. We will get the policy where I'm about to talk about. All it takes is 200 active people in a congressional district, and we've got it. Because we think that we can affect the discussion in primaries and the discussion in town hall meetings if we just get that. So it's a rather doable objective if we're now at 1,000, because we're looking for people on the right. So qualifying, you got to be thinking, I see the thought bubbles out of your heads. He must be a mushy moderate. Any Republican talking about climate change is surely like a northeastern moderate. They used to exist. I don't think they exist anymore. But well, let me give you some numbers. American Conservative Union rating. That's a conservative group, right? American Conservative Union. 93 lifetime. 100% Christian Coalition. 100% National Right to Life. A with the NRA. 0 with the Americans for Democratic Action. Quite proud of it. And 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO. I am not proud of that. I wanted a 0. And I've asked for a recount. It must have been they slipped in a vote about we support mother and apple pie or something, but in their rankings. So pretty conservative guy, right? That represented a very conservative district, Greenville-Spartanburg, South Carolina. I think it's probably the reddest district and the reddest state in the nation. Anybody here want to fight me for that distinction? I mean, maybe some places in Texas they might fight me for that distinction. I don't think Houston, though. Sorry, but not Houston. There's some places in Idaho that may fight me for that distinction, but we're pretty doggone conservative in South Carolina, right? And so I, for 6 years, said that climate change was nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. That was the end of the inquiry. I admit this is rather stupid, but that was the end of the inquiry. Then I was out of Congress 6 years doing commercial real estate law, again in Greenville, South Carolina. I ran for Congress again after my friend Joan DeMent left the House seat to run for the Senate. I ran for the House seat again in 2004. My son came to me, he was voting for the first time. He's the eldest of our 5 kids. And he said to me, "Dad, I'll vote for you, but you're going to clean up your act on the environment." It's the first of 3-step metamorphosis for me. By the way, my son was going to vote for me no matter what. I mean, we were mortgaging the farm. It would not have been his economic interest to vote against me. I mean, if we lost by 1 vote, believe me, that would be a bad deal. And so he's going to vote for me no matter what. What he's really saying was, "Dad, I love you, and you can be better than you were before." I got to believe, by the way, this is the August recess. There are a lot of members of Congress at home. They have some sons and daughters that are home from college. And I got to believe the conversation around the kitchen table is something like this: "Mom, Dad, I can't believe what you're saying about climate change in Congress. Do you realize you're paying all this money for me to go to the college or university? Do you realize they're saying the exact opposite of what you're saying in the halls of Congress? I mean, Mom, Dad, you're retro." I mean, it's got to be that conversation going on. By the way, I think that's the secret weapon. If we can get to the kids as members of Congress, this is done, right? Because, honest to goodness, like my son, he was embarrassed by me. And, you know, the worst thing you can do as a parent is embarrass your children, right? And so there, that was the first step. Was my son, by the way, his 4 sisters, his mother all agreed they could change the locks on the doors, and that's a very important constituency to respond to. I mean, you know, those people that can change the locks, you really want to keep those people happy. And so that's step 1. Step 2 was going to Antarctica with the Science Committee and seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings. Basically, that evidence is this. If we dig into the ice at the South Pole, it's a mile of ice. Contains a record of the Earth's atmosphere because it's a desert there. It's 1/4 of an inch of precipitation a year. It's a fun fact to know and tell you learned here tonight. And in that mile of ice is a record of the Earth's atmosphere. Shows stability followed by this uptick. It coincides, the CO2 levels increasing with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Well, now doesn't that make sense? I mean, I'm not a scientist. By the way, if you're running for Congress, let me give you a clue. That's not a good line. The polling data says, don't say that. It's sort of like saying, I'm not a truck driver, I have no position on highway funding, I'm not a doctor, I have no position on health care. Well, what is your profession then? Is that the only thing we can count on you to give us an idea on? So I'm not a scientist, but let's just figure this out, right? If on that farm that we were mortgaging to run again for Congress, I'm burning a tree this winter that was just growing on our farmette. Actually, it's here in Texas. Let me make sure you know it's a farmette. It's 27 acres, okay? Not 2,700, not 27,000, not whatever you all have here. You have big things here. Anyway, it's got 3 horses and 9 chickens and you know, some things like that on it, right? It's when you're not making a living on farming. Anyway, if I burn one of those trees, it's growing on my farmette into a fireplace this winter. I'm releasing carbon that marries up with some oxygen and makes CO2 in the process of burning that fuel. But that CO2 had just been coming out of the air into that tree. So it was no big deal, right? It's not changing anything in this geological time period. But if I go deep into the earth, which we are inclined to do here in Texas, and bring up things that have long been gone and burn them, it is an inexorable scientific, I mean, not many facts in science, but this is pretty close to a fact, that you're changing the chemistry of the air, right? And by the way, I'll tell you the point at which people disagree. That's not one of them. That if you want to disagree on that point, that's sort of like, sorry, you just failed Chemistry 101. Because you're clearly changing the chemistry of the air. The physics of light, as I learned in Antarctica, are such that light enters, but all the heat doesn't leave. Thank the Lord, because if it did, we'd burn in the sunlight and we'd freeze at night. So we have this wonderful greenhouse gas blanket around us that moderates our temperature here on this one planet that we know that we can live on. And so, by the way, nobody disagrees with that. That's the physics of light. Light enters, radiant heat doesn't all escape. The point of contention is how much human activity has to do with that. That is a point of contention. And we'll get into that later if you want to. So that was second step, going to Antarctica, seeing the evidence of the ice core drilling. Third step for this messenger was really a spiritual awakening. Another science committee trip, Great Barrier Reef, snorkeling with an Aussie climate scientist. And he was showing us coral bleaching. Here's another fun fact no one will tell. Coral has a symbiotic relationship with an algae. 1 degree increase in the water temperature, 1 degree C, the coral expels the algae and both die. Not sure why, but they just don't get along when it's hot in bed. They prefer it with lots of air conditioning. If it gets hot, they throw the sheets off or something and they kick each other out of the bed, right? And they both die. And so this Aussie climate scientist is showing me this. And St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times, if necessary, use words. Well, Scott was preaching the gospel full strength. I could see it in his eyes, I could hear it in his voice, I could see it on his face, that he was worshiping God by what we were seeing in the creation. And so I wanted to talk to him afterwards, and sure enough found out that we shared the worldview that I assumed. And he told me about conservation changes he was making in his life in order to love God and love people. And I got right inspired. I want to be like Scott Heron, the Aussie climate scientist. So I came home and introduced the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act of 2009. That is, we'll get into it later about what that is. I'll come back to telling you what that is. But here's the thing. Probably not a good idea to introduce a carbon tax in the midst of the Great Recession in the reddest district in the reddest state in the nation. It didn't go well. In fact, that and some other heresies I committed got Trey Gowdy 71% of the vote in the Republican primary runoff and me 29% of the vote after 12 years in Congress. So it was a rather spectacular face plant. And so at that point, one foundation came along and said to me, listen, Inglis, you are a very unusual zoo animal. A conservative, an actual conservative, not one that acts like they're conservative, but an actual conservative with a voting record to prove it, who is deeply committed to market principles, that says climate change is real. Will you speak and write for the proposition? I said, sure, if the cage is nice and the food's good. And so far, Peter has been giving me good food, and the cage is very nice here in Houston. A tad hot for my taste, but that's maybe climate change or something. I don't know. And so, so that's what I've been doing. That's the messengers. So I'm one of the messengers against 7 others working with me. They're all movement conservatives. I got a couple libertarians. I got a couple of people that are like me, Republicans. But they are committed to market principles. So those are messengers. Our MO, and I'll tell you that the messenger is the MO and a message. Our MO is quite different than the environmental left. The environmental left gives you the feeling that perhaps you are an invasive species. That we need to walk and eat bugs, do with less, sweat or shiver in the dark, depending on the season. Now, for those of you from the environmental left, you're saying, that's not true. That's not what we do. Well, let me just hold a conservative mirror for you so that you can see yourself in the mirror as we see you. Because that's what we see. And so, and I can tell you that those groups low-rated me, as I said earlier. I got great marks from those conservative groups, but I get F's and zeros from every environmental group. In fact, even Republicans for Environmental Protection, I can't remember what my grade was, but it was not a good grade. Not one you want to bring home to mom and dad, you know what I mean? And so, so our MO is not that, to talk about less and scarcity. It's rather talk about more, abundance. We talk about more energy, more mobility, more freedom. Further, our MO is the opposite of a threatening group. We don't rate anybody, we don't give grades. And we're the opposite of some groups on the right. For example, the Club for Growth. They call you up if you're a Republican member of Congress and say, get right or get gone in this next primary. If we called up and said that, they'd probably laugh on the other end of the line, right? Because the perception is that, no, you're left. You can't tell us to get left or get going in this next Republican primary. It's not really left, but it's maybe perceived as left, right? And furthermore, it's just not the way I want to deal with the people that I used to serve with in Congress. I don't want to threaten them. We want to be their best friends. So this morning I was on talk radio, and happy to take all the arrows that they can throw at me, because you know what? I'm already dead. And so it doesn't hurt anymore. And so go ahead and hit me with your best shot. You know, I mean, it's like, and it was sort of fun. It was fun to be on. If they'd just given me 2 more minutes, I could have answered his last question. If you heard that last question, he left it hanging, and golly, it was like, I told Peter, it's like coming straight across the plate and slow. It was a real opportunity for an absolute home run to this question about subsidies. We'll get into that in a minute. So our MO is to talk about more, not less. Our MO is to be friendly to conservatives, not to call them stupid. Because the environmental left also basically calls conservatives stupid. And they might object to that. They might say, no, we don't. But you know what? Let me just point out as a little footnote. It's not just the right that has a little problem with science. If you want to check out the science of GMOs, there's a pretty clear scientific answer on that thing. And it is, you bet we want to modify sugar beets, for example, hearing this morning on the radio, so that they can produce. And you bet we want to modify cassava so that people in Africa can stay alive. Why would we not want to stop that fungus from destroying the cassava plant? I mean, so we're not the only ones on the right that have a little problem with science. There are plenty on the left that got a problem with science. And so what we're after is, so our MO is to build up our tribe. And the ultimate objective is to bring America together. You might think, well, Inglis, that's rather strange. You can bring America together by forming an organization that divides. By your very name, you're dividing into those people that are raising their hands. I wanted to come and kiss each one of them, right? Well, the reason we do that, our MO, is that we think we've got to build them up. Because the problem is conservatives have an undeserved inferiority complex. We think we're no good. We're the kid in class that's got a real low self-esteem. And so when the topic of climate change comes up, we shrink in science denial. So like Peter up here is all the time talking to me about this marathon he wants me to run in. Well, I don't want to run any marathon. I mean, I'm telling you, 26 miles is too long for a human being to go. My sister ran marathons. I saw her at the finish line. Let me tell you, that's not a pretty sight. And so, love my sister, but she was not lovable at the end of those races, okay? So, every time Peter brings it up, I change the subject. Well, that's what conservatives do on climate change. You see, every time somebody brings up climate change, we change the subject to something else. ISIL or ISIS. We want to change the subject because we don't think we have an answer. But we do, and that's the message I'll now bring you. So we're trying to build up that tribe with this message. So I've told you about the messengers, told you about your MO. Now let me tell you about the message. The message is actually quite similar to CCL's. What we want is a revenue neutral, border adjustable carbon tax. Now, pay no attention, ladies and gentlemen, those last two words. Let's focus on the first two compound adjectives, all right? The first two compound adjectives were first revenue neutral. Second was border adjustable. Then we'll get to that carbon tax. Okay, so the idea is we're going to put a price on carbon dioxide. But the only way we at Republican are willing to do it, I think this is true of CCL, is if it's revenue neutral. That means that the government ain't going to grow. There's some people like Henry Waxman, my former colleague, I guess I'm former and he's former now. He had a carbon tax, and the idea was to put a revenue positive carbon tax. That's where you increase the size of government. You add revenue to the government. Well, we're not for that. It's got to be revenue neutral. So for CCL, they talk a great deal about, and I'm on the advisory board of CCL, and I'm very glad to be, because I love the DNA of the organization. The affirmation, the support that they give, the pleasantness of the people that are involved really is really quite unique. And so our means of getting to revenue neutrality at republicEn is a little bit different. We'd say, first we talk about tax cuts. If we're going to put a carbon tax on, we say, well, then let's cut taxes somewhere else. It could be corporate income tax reduction, it could be personal income tax reduction, or it could be payroll tax reduction. Payroll tax, of course, is what the person who served you most recently at a fast food restaurant, they're paying 12.4% on the first dollar they make at that job. It's a massive, regressive tax on income. 12.4% tax. And it's unavailable. It's like if you, unless you're an illegal employer and an illegal employee, you pay that tax. And so we would reduce any one of those, either corporate, individual, or payroll taxes. Or, this is where we're in complete agreement with CCL, or we would dividend the money back to the American people, like the Alaska Permanent Fund. So the people get a check in the mail for the amount of the carbon tax coming back to them. And so that's revenue neutral, or revenue neutrality. The second thing that's imperative for us at republicEn.org, and I think for CCL as well, is that it has to be border adjustable. And what that means is it's imposed on imports. We think in a WTO, as World Trade Organization, compliant way, and if you want to get into that, we'll tell you why that is. But what it means is that it would become in our trading partners' interest to do the same thing. And let me explain why. Right now, there's a flat steel shipment coming into the port of Philadelphia from a state-run industry in China. If we had the carbon tax that I'm talking about, we would apply the tax on entry to that flat steel. They would be remitting money to Washington, D.C. They challenge in the WTO. We think it would be upheld. There's a good argument there on both sides for that, right, by the way, but we think it can be upheld. If it is, China, within 24 hours, because as you know, they have quite a way of reaching consensus there, would impose the same price on carbon dioxide. Why? Well, on landing in Philadelphia, they're remitting a tax to Washington. If they had just collected that in China, they would have remitted to Beijing. So how long do you think it takes a government to figure out we are losing revenue? Why don't we just do this ourselves? And so then China comes to the same price on carbon dioxide as we've got, and then the whole world follows suit. No need for an international agreement. No going to the UN and negotiating some hopelessly complicated, endless agreement. Just a bold commercial move by the United States, saying this is what we're going to do, and we'll meet you in the WTO if you want to object to it. And then when we win in the WTO, they say, okay, got us. We're going to do the same thing. And then the world goes to a truer price of energy. Now, this is the most important thing you'll hear me say tonight. is that's the message that fits with conservatism. The world goes to truer price of energy. The problem right now is, let's assume that I'm Inglis Industries and I make coal-fired electricity. My electricity is really cheap. In fact, so cheap that you probably wouldn't even know how much it cost if I were making coal-fired electricity. At the meter, at least, it looks cheap. And for all my customers, they're quite happy. But for my neighbors, the people who breathe in my small particulates, because I get to socialize my soot, aren't too happy. But most of them just cough it up and go on. Some of them end up in the hospital. When they get there, unless Milton Friedman was wrong, and that's not possible. If you're a conservative, it is not possible that Milton Friedman was wrong. But in 1975, he wrote a book, the title of which was There's No Such Thing as a Free Lunch. There's no such thing as cheap coal-fired electricity. Because Inglis Industries is fouling people's lungs. Those people go to the hospital. When they get to the hospital, if they're my 93-year-old dad on Medicare, you pay. If they're my 21-year-old niece, Down syndrome child, on Medicaid, because it's the only way she can be insured, you pay. If they're on Blue Cross and Blue Shield, like you and I'm on Blue Cross and Blue Shield, perhaps you are, we pay. Because our premiums go up because they just got claims from Inglis Industries soot. So one way or another, we're paying currently the full cost of currently the full cost of Inglis Industries looking cheap coal-fired electricity. Now, so far I've just been talking about the health costs. Those are real and quantifiable and immediate, not subject to much variation based on the discount rate that you apply and the time period, right? Get your real number there pretty quickly. Now, if we're talking about, there's another part of my damages that I'm causing to society as Inglis Industries, and that is climate damages. Some of them are long-term, like continuing sea level rise. Others, like the bark beetle out west, and not long-term. We're talking right now. The winters aren't cold enough in Montana to reduce the population of the bark beetle. The thing is sweeping through the forest, like it did in British Columbia, which is the reason British Columbia put on a carbon tax. I went up there to the invitation of the conservative government to try to shore up support for their carbon tax. And that was the explanation they gave me, was it was the destruction of the forest that caused British Columbians to come together and say, that's it, we got to do something about climate change. It's real and immediate if you're talking about the impact on the Magic Kingdom. How many people want to go to Orlando if it's sort of like going to Rio? You know, we got golfers that aren't going to Rio. We got swimmers that aren't going to Rio. I mean, you want to go to the Magic Kingdom if they got Zika there and dengue? Okay, so some of them are closer, but a lot of climate damages are further off, and that's subject to some real variation based on the discount rate you apply to it and things like that. The result is you can get a big variation in the numbers of the cost that Inglis Industries is causing to society. But the cost is way north of zero. And right now we're saying it's zero, which is clearly bad policy. Because as long as I get away with it doing that to you, the health cost and the climate cost, I'm happy as a clam. All right, I'm Inglis Industries. And I'm heard to say to the member of Congress locally that, oh no, you can't put on a carbon tax. If you put on a carbon tax, I'd have to increase the price of my electricity. I'm looking forward to the day when the Republican congressman or woman or senator looks back at me, Inglis Industries, and say, well, Inglis, we're already paying the full cost of your electricity. Just not at the meter. We're paying through the healthcare system. And so put it on the meter and let's see if the free enterprise system, if the free market likes your product anymore. Because you know what? They might like wind. They might like solar instead. And so it's basically this thing of internalizing negative externalities. And so that's the essence of what we're talking about at CCL, what we're talking about at republicEn.org, is internalizing negative externalities. The only problem with that is a little bit, takes a little explanation, right? Because otherwise people say, what in the heck are you talking about? It basically just means attaching to products their actual cost. And it's what Milton Friedman talked about. And if you want to see some interesting clips, go to our website. You'll see him on the Phil Donahue show telling Phil, what do you do about pollution? You tax it, of course. That's what Milton Friedman said to do. You don't regulate it, he said, you tax it. And to the point of tonight's conversation, finally, about the message that we've got about this free enterprise alternatives, is we think the Clean Power Plan is precisely the worst way to deal with climate change. It's a regulatory, sector by sector, prone to litigation, domestic-only solution. Now, in fairness to the president, if he were here, he would say, Inglis, if you had 25 votes in the Republican conference in the House and 15 Senate Republicans ready to vote for what you've just described to these people right here tonight, I would ditch the Clean Power Plan in a skinny minute and go with what you're talking about. But Inglis, you don't have 25 votes in the Republican conference, and you don't have 15 Senate votes. And so I'm going with the only thing I got, which is a Clean Power Plan under the Clean Air Act, not intended for this purpose, subject to litigation, domestic only, but I've got just one tool in this rusty old toolbox and I'm going to use it. Then he'd be right about that. So what we live to do, and what CCL is doing, is creating a movement of people who say, you know what, we really can bring America together here. Because there are progressives who would go for exactly what we're talking about. They would use different language to get there. But we really can bring America together. And if you want to know the kind of things that inspire me, and I'll stop with this now that you've heard about the messenger and the MO and the message, is that one of the things that inspired me is knowing that Art Laffer, Ronald Reagan's economics advisor of the Laffer curve, lives in Nashville, Tennessee. Art was tired of California, and so he chose among 8 states that were entitled to receive his residency. Do you know what those 8 states have in common? No income tax, that's right, no state income tax. So Tennessee being one of those, lo and behold, Art ends up as a neighbor of Al Gore's. Art's been over to Al's house. They talked it through and they came to the conclusion that this works, what I've just described, what CCL describes, works for both of them. Art, because he wants anything to reduce taxes on income. He told me, he said, tax pine needles instead of income, and anything but income. Al, because he wants reduced emissions. In a normal American, you know, we can have political parties smiling for very different reasons. Al, because he's getting reduced emissions. Art, because he's getting income tax reduction or a dividend. The result is that we really can bring America together. So at the end of the day, that's our goal. It's just that we're going to do it by these messengers and the MO of building up our team so that they feel more comfortable engaging in this conversation rather than shrinking in science denial. Let me see what questions you have. Comments, questions? Yes, sir.
All right, so first one is, how do you get over the carbon tax that you don't want to say? And we've tried to use carbon fee, and Brooks hurt my feel, and Mr. Culbertson is not buying the carbon tax thing. So how do I get Mr. Culbertson to get over that edge?
Well, I think that we call it a carbon tax. I mean, I'm joking about the carbon tax, but we just call it straight out a carbon tax. Because my friend Jim DeMint would jump on me with both feet rightly if I tried to hide it with some other kind of word.
Okay, so
because a tax by any or another name is a tax. You can try to call it a fee, you can try to call it a something, One of the most creative I've heard is from Walt Minnick, a former member of Congress from Idaho. He calls it a carbon-funded tax cut. Now, he gets an A+ for the most creative way of describing it. Get it there right. A carbon-funded tax cut. That is what it is, but I think that we just got to go ahead and call it what it is. It's a tax. And Milton Friedman, Uncle Milt, said this on the Phil Donahue show. I mean, we conservatives, bow at the mention of his name. He and Reagan, we go like this when you mention their names. He says, how you deal with pollution? You tax it. That's what you do with it. And so, Jim Nemet standing here, I'd say, Jim, we're going to tax it, just like Milton Friedman said to do. Next question is what I'd say to Jim at that point. Yes, sir.
Two questions, one comment. First, I think the first comment is that instead of addressing it the way maybe you are, you start thinking about it as a material balance. Because anybody who understands systems or engineering, and the common person knows how to do a material balance. What we gives, what we gets, and what the delta is.
Talk loud so they can hear you back there. Oh, I hear you back there.
And the second part of this, is
he's giving me an engineering lesson up here, and I'm not following too
No.
much. So I'm going to ask Peter if it gets hard. Go ahead.
No, and then the second question is more around the processes, because it's very, very difficult to get intrinsic value around certain items. And frankly, the government, in this particular case, it's 1972 when the clean water and all the rest was happening and the acid rain issues, was only the only result that could possibly happen to get the United States basically back on track to stop killing rivers, lakes, forests from the Northeast. And it was mothers, soccer moms, CEOs who were all getting sick. I mean, it was a material war against health, frankly, that precipitated Nixon, another guy who doesn't get much credit, but passed in the Clean Air Act.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to understand how you go back and undo all of this after basically 40 years of litigation. Companies who've already spent enormous amounts of money. I mean, how are you going to get the SO2, the NOx, the VOCs, particulates into some level to actually put a price tag on it? Because that's the difficulty. I agree with the principle. The difficulty is the detail in terms of how you say, whether it's PM10s or PM2.5s, whatever it happens to be. So help me with that.
Well, for example, acid rain.
Because I agree with you. I'm not pushing back on
Yeah.
it.
Well, acid rain, we wouldn't undo that. I voted against cap and trade for CO2, but cap and trade worked for acid rain.
Absolutely.
The reason it worked is there were relatively few producers of the stuff that was creating the problem. And so you got them in a room this size and you said, listen, fellas and ladies, you're going to live under this cap. Now trade underneath it. That was fine. The difference with CO2, and the reason I voted against cap and trade, is hopelessly complicated. Cap and trade became Waxman-Markey. It was a massive tax increase. It would have decimated American manufacturing. And it was embarrassing in the free allocations for the well-connected. And so, for all those reasons, I voted against cap and trade, but I proposed this alternative, this revenue-neutral border-adjustable carbon tax, which is that bill that I told you about that got me in so much trouble. But we'd leave in place the acid rain. That's working.
Because it's basically an energy savings. I mean, CO2 is just a euphemism for energy savings. I mean, if you call it what it is, which is basically a press to get energy savings throughout any industry, then there's a delta that you can measure. I don't disagree with what you're saying. I actually agree with it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you can explain that to people if they don't understand that there's an actual energy difference that actually is the unit of tax.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and so remember earlier I said that the talk show host this morning gave me that one that was coming right over the plate. The way he said at the end was I was pointing out that ExxonMobil is for what we're talking about.
Exactly, absolutely.
Which may come as a surprise to some in the room, but Rex Tillerson has said for a number of years now that what I've just described here, ExxonMobil is for. And by the way, if you're like, I told the lady that used to give me PAC checks from ExxonMobil, a wonderful gal named Jeannie Mitchell in Washington, straight shooting gal. I told her one time, Jeannie, if I'm standing in front of a bunch of progressives and I tell them that ExxonMobil is for a carbon tax, they look back at me and they say, that's just Rex Tillerson trying to kill cap and trade. That's the only reason he's talking about a carbon tax. She set me straight. She said, Bob, we here at ExxonMobil sell petroleum and natural gas. If you put a tax on carbon dioxide, we sell a lot more natural gas, and we beat coal better than we're beating them now. She said, that's why we're for carbon tax. And I said, great, Jeannie. I can just go tell conservatives that you're just trying to make money. What else is believable? I mean, right? I mean, that's the only thing they can. My dad, my 93-year-old dad, as mentioned earlier, is a teeny-weeny shareholder of ExxonMobil. I want them to make lots of money. See, there's a difference between us and the environmental left. The environmental left thinks that ExxonMobil is somehow evil. I've told ExxonMobil over and over, buy us if you want to. We'd be happy to be a wholly owned subsidiary. You know, if you can buy a 501c3 organization, but a tax-exempt entity. But we're for them. I told Jeannie, we're the only people in the climate space that will smooch with you on camera. I mean, the rest of them would treat you like you're some kind of pariah or some kind of untouchable. We say, great, ExxonMobil wants to make money. Bless them. Make more money, ExxonMobil. Because you know what? The answer to this isn't coming from some poor country. The answer to this is coming from the wealthy West. That's where this is going to come from. The innovation is going to come from labs here in America. It's not going to come from some very poor nation that has all the sentiment in the world to solve climate change, but we have the solutions that are going to work once we fix this problem of economics. Because what's available to us here in energy is just like what happened in the cell phone business, in the internet and the PC. DARPA started the internet and the PC for a defense purpose, and then commercialization was left to Bill Gates and others, Steve Jobs. And the result is they competed and drove down the price to the point now where there are a lot of cell phones in this audience right now, a lot of smartphones with more computing capacity than the manned missions to the moon. And so at a price that you and I can afford, well, that's coming in energy. And it's going to be enormous disruption to everybody that's currently in the energy business, most particularly the utility sector. If you're a power company, your business is about to change like you can't believe. I mean, and so, but just a small digression, just tell me why it is that power companies like Georgia Power fought solar power, rooftop solar. It's inconceivable to me that they would fight it. You know what? They fought it, but they lost. There's a joke in the power industry that used to go like this. What's the market price of a Georgia state legislator? The answer is, don't know. Georgia Power hadn't sold one lately. And so they thought they could stop the Public Service Commission from authorizing third-party financing of rooftop solar. That means I'm a homeowner, I can't afford a $25,000 system, but if you will start a company that finances it for me and maybe even own it on my roof and lease it to me or some kind of arrangement like that, then I can afford it. Well, they thought they could stop that. But this wonderful gal named Debbie Dooley, who is a Tea Party person, and you know, I was beaten by the Tea Party, but when they're right, for goodness sakes, congratulate them, and she is right about this. She said, this is my house, it's my castle, and that is my roof, and I'll be doggone if some monopoly power company is going to stop me from contracting with somebody to put a solar system up there. And lo and behold, she beat him in the Georgia Public Service Commission. Now, Florida Power and Light is fighting like mad right now to stop it from happening in the Sunshine State. But the thing I can't figure out is why don't they get with it what you've got in Texas? What George W. Bush, back to this thing about our inferiority complex, George W. Bush, as governor of this great state, was the one who did the most innovation here about electricity. The guy named Pat Wood of the Public Service Commission. And so, and this is an inconceivable part to me, why would Florida Power and Light, the people who I've trusted if I'm a Floridian to bring power to my house, not get in the business before Solar City? Who the heck's Solar City? They've never been to my house. But Florida Power and Light has been there to turn the power back on after the hurricane or whatever. Who am I going to trust to go up on my roof and drill some holes? Some fly-by-night like Inglis Solar Contracting? Or Florida Power and Light? Florida Power and Light could own all those systems on our roofs. They don't even have to buy the house. Just put it up there and create electricity. They don't have to build a new plant. Put it on my roof. Why don't they do that? Reason? They're stuck in an old way of thinking and they're about to lose their whole business. And so, sure, there's risk here, but I mean, in this, again, back to high-octane conservatism, let me just say, if I was at the Pachyderm Club this morning, or at lunchtime, a lot of acceptance about what I was saying in body language and facial expressions, except at the very end when I got jumped by a very, very senior fellow, as in advanced age, who had all the normal things that you hear right now on talk radio. And I could see it in the face of the people who had been following me that this guy was singing old tunes, right? It was an oldies song he was singing. And so what we've got to do is break through to that new way of thinking, because basically what he was advocating was protecting buggy whip manufacturers. Because my colleagues in the Republican conference have always been people that have been, until this current presidential cycle, for free trade. And we've always used the example of buggy whip manufacturers. I can't help you if you're a buggy whip manufacturer. Well, that was the message of that fellow today, is that we got to protect this current model of energy we got. Why? Why don't we protect this old system? Why don't we roll with something new like you did in Texas? So anyway, if you give me an amen, I'll stop preaching on that, and then we'll move on to the next question. Yes, sir, you got a question right there.
Yeah. What do you see the role of the carbon tax in meeting our Paris climate pledge? I wrote a column yesterday where I looked at some of the different plans for getting there. World Resource Institute, for example, has a 10-point plan that assumes you can't get anything through Congress. Congress won't do anything, and so they have to kind of jump through all sorts of hoops to get there. Do you see the carbon tax as being a better way to get to the pledge, or what do you see the role?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I'm very optimistic about Congress actually coming around on this. And the reason is that I am so confident that what we're talking about is completely consistent with what conservatives believe. And it also happens to be consistent with what many progressives believe. The proposal that we're talking about is something that, for example, would be, as I said earlier, completely acceptable to Al Gore. It would be acceptable to Barack Obama. I talked to Gina McCarthy, the head of the EPA. I was at a Bloomberg event with her, and I said to her, Gina, I want to say something to you. I don't want to ask you a question because I don't want to get you in any trouble. But I told her, I know that you would ditch the Clean Power Plan if you had these votes, and then what I said earlier. And she didn't answer, and I didn't want her to answer because I really didn't want her to get in any trouble. But I wanted to plant the thought with her and to take it back to the White House that there are people out there trying to grow that vote to 25 and 15. And then Democrats will supply a lot of other votes, but it will happen, I think. Because it's either that or a regulatory solution. Now back to the high-octane conservatism, talking politically now to conservatives here, is what do you want to do? Wait until the country decides that it's got a felt need and it takes the regulatory solution, which is the only one offered? Or do you want to come up with a better solution like that CCL has, like we're talking about at republicEn.org, and get in there in the competition of ideas and get out front of this thing? And so I think it's going to happen. I think that it's like somebody said of the financial crisis, it's amazing how the impossible went to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. I think that's what the carbon tax is going to be. It's going to be the impossible that goes to the inevitable without ever passing through the probable. And the reason is around those climate talks, which I didn't go to because there's no role for us there. because we're doing American politics stuff, or American education within the political system here. And but what I understand is that from all kinds of companies that were swirling around those talks, the constant refrain was just give us a price on carbon dioxide and leave us alone. In other words, don't try to regulate our business. It's like BMW makes some very fine autos in Spartanburg, South Carolina. They came there because, you know, BMW means Bubba makes wheels. I don't know if you knew that or not. But anyway, so they came to the district that I represent to make cars, right? They make very fine cars. They paint them very carefully. And what they told me is, listen, Inglis, please keep DHEC from telling us how to paint cars. All we need from DHEC is the parts per million you want us to release. Because we can assure DHEC, DHEC, the Department of Health and Environmental Control in South Carolina, we can assure DHEC that we know more about painting the BMW than they do. And that's what all those businesses around the climate talks in Paris were saying, as I understand it, is just give us a price, and we'll do the delta that you were talking about. We will make these things happen, right? Leslie, are you giving me the hook?
Yeah, I think so. So sorry, I saw a few more hands. So first of all, thank you, Congressman Inglis, for spending your evening with us. We're right at the top of the hour, but as I said, we do have the space for another half an hour. So feel free to go into the back, raid the rest of the food and drinks that are left. Those of you in the back will benefit from that, so hit it first. And Congressman Inglis will be around, and just enjoy yourselves, chat, and thank you all for coming. Thanks so much.